Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? Senator Gordon, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam President. It's nice to see you, and I will speak on the amendment. I do support the amendment. One of the things that I often say is about common sense. And although there are times that it can be difficult to define common sense with words, we understand that. We know that in the real world, common sense can be readily recognized, especially based upon years of experience and years of living. And it also can be readily recognized if you use common sense in your daily life and as a work ethic. And the people of Connecticut understand common sense, and I understand common sense, and this amendment to me is very much so common sense. And why is that? I believe that all of us support wanting to fix the problem that was created evidently from legislation from 2022. I wasn't here at the time, so I can't be blamed at all for anything that might have happened that some people say was foreseeable, that we have to now fix. I think we all support wanting to do what we can to fix the problem before us that's going to unfairly and unduly hit those with regards to commercial motor vehicle tax assessments and tax bills. That's a very straightforward thing to do. To me, that's common sense. As we heard my colleague, Senator Sampson, talk, if there is that simple thing that we need to do, then we should keep it simple. And we should focus on the problem at hand and fix the problem at hand. I dare say, I think if we do just that as a standalone bill and highlight that, I think you'd get everybody to vote for that. But unfortunately, there's several complexities that have come about. And they've come about, I think, not because of public policy, but because of politics. And that's a shame if something that should be readily fixed, that we all identify regardless of party, we should focus on that. Keep it simple. And that's common sense. Unfortunately, even though this law, which is current law, I agree with Senator Sampson, it is indeed current law, doesn't matter that this law has been delayed in its implementation regarding the depreciation schedule that starts at 80% and every year goes down 5%. Until you reach a certain point where the floor for assessment or the value can't be less than $500 total. That's going to go into effect this year. That is the current law, and that is a change that will happen if this is not voted in the entirety of the bill. But what this amendment gets to is if that's the current law and that's going to go into effect, why, in an effort to fix something straightforward and simple, is something additional now going to be tagged onto it? And also additionally and concurrently, it's part of this big monster omnibus bill, 137 pages of various sections aren't even related to each other. And that's not a clean process or a clean way of doing things. And that's not a common sense way of doing things, and why many of my constituents scratch their heads and wonder why does the legislature have to make things difficult when it should just focus on the simple and the common sense way of doing things. This amendment, again, is common sense. And I very strongly support fixing the problem that is going to hit those with regards to commercial motor vehicles. Now, certainly looking at it politically, and when we look at this amendment, I know certainly things wouldn't have been brought up today for special session if there hadn't been vote counting, and that this certainly overall, not the amendment per se, but the overall bill having a good chance to pass. So regardless of how I may vote on the overall bill, and whatever may happen with this amendment before us that I'm speaking on, I'm glad that at a base level, there will be a fix. But I'm also deeply concerned, not just about the process, but I'm also deeply concerned about what could be the impact when, in a sense, increasing taxes on people. We heard here on the Senate floor that if this doesn't pass, this amendment doesn't pass, or the bill itself doesn't pass, that some people will, or how many people will see decreases in their motor vehicle tax assessment in their bills. But then this amendment is trying to get to saying, why increase? That doesn't make any sense. And one can argue, well, the towns will lose revenue if that isn't done. But at the end of the day, it is a tax increase. I've not heard anything explained to me today here in the Senate chamber, or anything explained to me otherwise when I've tried to really learn the details of what happened before I joined the Senate and what's been going on with regards to this. And my comments have nothing to do with personally any of the proponents of the bill. I'm just looking at it from a public policy and a legislative process point of view. I've seen nothing to say that it isn't going to be a tax increase compared to what the current law, when enacted, would do. Now, to me, that's certainly, you can connect the dots from A to B in a very common sense way. And when I talk with my constituents, that's how they view it. And they can get, as I can at times, befuddled by all the minutiae and details, but at the end of the day, that's my concern. And to hit hardworking people, families, retirees with tax increase during a time of a high cost of living in the state of Connecticut that we should continue to focus on to address in real world meaningful ways, and also given the overall high tax burden that people are feeling, to me that's not common sense. That's not a right thing to do. My constituents who I've been talking with, and I'm always out and about the 13 towns that I'm proud and honored to represent, they understand things, looking at things in a common sense way of understanding about what really could be tax increases and what is not. And they don't like tax increases. There's a number of my towns, and I can readily think of 3, that have had continued to vote down their budgets and finally pass them because people feel overtaxed, and that's their way to address it. I don't want to be hitting them with more. I'm proud to do what I can do, especially if one can do it in a bipartisan way, to make things easier for them and to lessen the tax burden for them. So I'm very concerned about what this bill would do, and this amendment to me is the right thing to do. It says, again, in a common sense way, let's not add more into this and make things worse for people. Let's focus on a fix that should be fixed. Now, one of the big problems, this amendment doesn't fully address that, but as we have been hearing, one of the big problems is that the overall bill is not a clean bill. In fact, the motion to divide things up failed on a party line vote of those members here today who voted. That's unfortunate. That's not a common sense way of doing things, but at least this amendment is trying to get at something to say, if the current law is the current law and it's going to go into effect, it goes into effect. Don't make it worse, and see what we can do to fix the problem that actually we know needs to be fixed. That's the number one thing. That should be the only thing we should focus on relative to this issue, is fix the problem that has been created, address that. That's a positive thing to do, and don't monkey around with anything else. Now, one of the things I'm very concerned about, in addition, and I believe this amendment gets to it, is one can cite all sorts of statistics about who may benefit relative to what their car tax might be if this amendment is not passed, and if the overall bill that this amendment gets to is passed, and also who might see higher taxes. And one can cite all sorts of statistics and numbers, but I believe that whatever one says about the number of people who would be negatively affected, I think that's going to be, there's an underestimation about that. And one of the examples why I say that is we all know there can be unintended consequences, and there seemed to be from that bill that was the law that was passed in 22, and now we have to be here to fix that. And I'm concerned about what more we might have to do in the future to fix if this passes. And this amendment, I believe, is a way to try to lessen that negative impact, lessen that unintended consequence. And when we talk about unintended consequences, we're just not talking about that on a piece of paper and on a bill. We're talking about the lives and livelihoods of the people, not just in my 13 towns, but all throughout in Connecticut. And we should be extremely careful of trying to make changes that gets away from the focus that should be to fix the commercial motor vehicle tax problem, when in the real world, the unintended consequences, which I think could be foreseeable, will have that type of negative impact. One of the big issues also, and this amendment is trying to get to that, is we should be doing this in a process that is as clean and straightforward and common sense as we should do. I strongly support fixing this for those who are going to be whacked on the head with regards to commercial motor vehicle tax assessments. But to then muddy the waters with this, no matter how much one may say that this overall bill or the sections that this amendment is trying to get to is really something positive, I think what it really is that when you cut the ears off of a mule, it doesn't become a horse. And no offense to horses or mules, but if you really look at what's underlying this, any of the proposed changes that this amendment is trying to get to, or anything else that's all bundled in, there's some good sections and some bad sections, overall to me makes some things worse. And again, let's keep this simple, let's use common sense, and let's see what we can do to just focus on this one issue that we all know needs to be fixed, and not try to muddy things more. That's my concern. I strongly support this amendment for what it's trying to do. I hope that my colleagues will across the aisle will vote for it. I'm certainly not naive, so I think I can predict what may happen. But this is still a fight that's worth fighting, and we should always remember that. And our constituents understand what isn't common sense and what isn't simple and what might hurt them. So, Madam President, I strongly support this amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to vote yes and keep it simple and use common sense. Thank you.